I never thought the day would come when I'd be sitting in my garage, drinking lukewarm coffee and building blueprints for a medieval-style moat around my house. All because of one woman named Karen who decided to turn my life into a real-life suburban boss battle. But there I was, watching her smugly reverse her over-polished SUV across my freshly paved driveway like she owned the ground beneath my feet. That moment when her tires squealed to a halt in front of my garage and she hopped out, clipboard in hand, smirking like the villain in a soap opera, I knew peace was dead and HOA Karen had declared war. You'd think living in a neighborhood with neatly trimmed hedges and overly enthusiastic Christmas lights would be a dream for me. It started like that, until my dream home became ground zero for the most absurd neighborhood feud in suburban history. I had only been in the house for 3 days when the first crack showed. I was moving boxes into the garage, humming along to some classic rock on my speaker and trying not to trip over bubble wrap, when I heard the tires screech. Her SUV came to a sudden halt right across my driveway. At first, I thought she was lost, but then she stepped out dressed in a powerwalk tracksuit, hair tied back so tight it looked like it hurt, and those big square sunglasses that made her look like a judgmental owl. She scanned my front yard with the precision of a military drone. Then she marched up to me and said, "We have rules in this neighborhood. Your garbage bins are 2 inches off alignment. No hello, no welcome to the neighborhood. Just cold, bureaucratic aggression wrapped in expensive perfume." I chuckled, assuming she was joking. She wasn't. She handed me a printed HOA manual, at least 200 pages, and told me I had 72 hours to comply or face sanctions. Sanctions, as if this were the United Nations, and I just committed a war crime by painting my mailbox black instead of the approved forest green. I tried to reason with her, explain that I just moved in, that my boxes hadn't even been unpacked yet, but she wasn't having it. She pointed to her laminated ID badge as if it gave her federal authority and muttered something about standards. I thought maybe that would be the worst of it. A little turf scuffle, a few passive-aggressive notes. I could deal with that. But on the 5th day, when the movers came back to deliver a delayed shipment, we found her SUV parked directly across my driveway. I knocked on her door politely, I swear, and asked if she could move it. She leaned against her porch railing like she was queen of the block and said, "You can wait. It's only for a few hours." I pointed out the fact that I couldn't access my own home. She smiled, actually smiled. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you put that unsightly statue in your front yard." The statue was a gift from my late grandfather, a small eagle perched on a branch, nothing wild, but apparently it violated the neighborhood's aesthetic cohesion. I was starting to realize this wasn't about rules. This was personal. Karen had crowned herself monarch of the cul-de-sac, and I had unknowingly built my castle on her land. It didn't stop there. Over the next week, I started getting daily citations from the HOA. My garden hose was too visible. My lawn had an unapproved grass pattern. My porch light was 3 lumens over the neighborhood standard. She was weaponizing the rule book like a suburban artillery cannon, and the SUV, still parked across my driveway, was now a daily fixture, like a middle finger with wheels. I tried everything: letters, HOA meetings, even offering to repaint my mailbox. But the more I complied, the more rules appeared. She was playing a game, and I was the pawn. The tipping point came when I received a formal letter, not from her, but from the HOA, signed by her and her 2 closest lackeys. It stated that due to landscaping inconsistencies and repeated visual offenses, my driveway access would be temporarily suspended pending review. They had voted to allow Karen to use my driveway as a temporary vehicle extension for beautification purposes. Beautification. Of all the absurdities, this was the one that lit the fuse. I stood in my garage that night, staring at the blocked driveway, and something inside me snapped, not in a violent way, but in the kind where you stop playing by other people's rules. I wasn't going to fight her with more letters or pleas for sanity. I was going to give her exactly what she wanted: a driveway she couldn't park on. A driveway so inaccessible, so ridiculous, and so magnificently over-engineered that she'd never step foot on it again. I was going to build a moat, a real one, with water, fish, maybe even a mechanical gator if Rick could swing it. I dusted off an old drafting board, pulled out my college notebooks from when I minored in engineering for 6 months, and called the one man crazy enough to help me pull this off. Rick, my old roommate, now a garage inventor with a minor obsession for trebuchets. I sketched the first version of the plan right there on a pizza box: a shallow trench, decorative rocks, koi fish, and a remote-operated drawbridge. Functional, artistic, and most importantly, compliant with every single line in the HOA rule book. Decorative water features were allowed, retractable elements were not forbidden, and the best part? No vehicle, no matter how smugly parked, could cross a moat. As I drew, I imagined her face when she returned to find her personal parking kingdom turned into a medieval marvel. I wasn't just taking back my driveway. I was rewriting the whole suburban playbook. And this time, I had the element of surprise, the power of engineering, and just enough pettiness to see it through. Let the HOA come. Let Karen throw her clipboards and citations. The age of passive resistance was over. I was going full Moat. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of energy usually reserved for mad scientists and teenagers pulling pranks. Karen may have had the HOA backing her with paperwork and petty rules, but I had something stronger. Motivation driven by pure, undiluted annoyance and a blueprint for petty revenge that would go down in suburban legend. I started the day by clearing the garage, tossing out old boxes, rearranging tools, and setting up a proper workspace. This wasn't going to be some half-baked prank. No, this would be precision-engineered poetic justice. A moat around my driveway with water, with fish, and a drawbridge so magnificent it would make medieval kings jealous. But I needed help, not just from anyone, but from the only person I knew who would think this was a good idea and somehow make it an even crazier one. Rick arrived that afternoon in a van held together by duct tape, hope, and whatever glue dreams are made of. He stepped out wearing cargo shorts, flip-flops, and a t-shirt that said, "Chaos is a plan." The moment I told him the plan, he didn't even blink. He just nodded and said, "Finally, my entire life has been leading to this moment." And just like that, Operation Moat began. First, we reviewed the HOA guidelines in painful detail, page after page of what you can't do with your lawn, your fence, your mailbox, even your garden gnomes. But then, buried in section 4.7.2, we found it. Decorative water features were permitted, so long as they blend with the natural landscape, remain under 12 feet in width, and do not cause erosion or pose a safety risk. A moat, if built shallow enough and designed to appear ornamental, could technically fit. It had to look like art, peaceful, serene, completely harmless. And underneath that serene beauty, it would be a fortress of inconvenience. Rick, ever the schemer, added his own twist. "We should make the drawbridge automated," he said. "Push a button, and boom, it lifts. She can't even argue about access. It's just not there." He pulled out a notebook filled with sketches from other bizarre inventions he'd built, some questionable, like the squirrel-powered toaster, but others oddly functional, like the rain-powered porch light. We got to work. First step, digging. But not in plain sight. That would trigger Karen's nosy radar within seconds. So, we devised a cover story. I told the neighbors I was building a koi pond as part of a therapeutic landscaping experience. Karen's spies, 3 retired ladies who walked every morning and reported everything, were told the same thing. We began the digging late at night and early in the morning. Rick built wooden sound barriers to muffle the noise. We set up fake garden gnomes with built-in cameras to alert us if anyone got too close, and we used landscaping tarps with printed grass patterns on top, so the trench work wouldn't be visible from the street. Within 3 days, we had the basic trench dug, 4 feet wide, 2 feet deep, winding artistically around the driveway in a U-shape. We lined it with smooth stones and a black waterproof tarp that would hold the water. Karen passed by multiple times during this process, always with narrowed eyes and a suspicious squint. "Pond, huh?" she asked once. I nodded and replied, "Koi fish. Very calming. Good for the soul." She huffed and kept walking. With the moat trench complete, Rick shifted his focus to the drawbridge. We salvaged a section of old decking from a junkyard and reinforced it with steel rods. Then he installed a motorized pulley system powered by a car battery and rigged it to a remote control. It wasn't just functional, it was smooth. Press a button, and the bridge lifted with a satisfying mechanical hum. We even added lights under the bridge that glowed at night, making it look elegant instead of ridiculous. But we didn't stop there. Rick had the wild idea to install a fog machine under the drawbridge for dramatic effect. "Just imagine," he said. "Karen comes to park, and mist starts rising from the moat like some haunted castle. It's beautiful. It's psychological warfare. As we prepared to fill the moat with water, I received a surprise visit that almost derailed everything. The HOA inspector, an actual city employee who did surprise compliance checks, showed up on a Wednesday morning. Karen must have reported the pond as a potential hazard. I had about 30 seconds to hide all evidence of the drawbridge mechanics. Rick activated the fog machine and staged a yoga class on the lawn with a few friends we bribed with pizza. The inspector, overwhelmed by the scented mist and calming music, took one look at the half-filled moat and said, "Looks peaceful." He didn't even ask about permits, just handed me a pamphlet on water conservation and left. With the close call behind us, we went into overdrive. The moat was filled, the drawbridge was functioning, and the fog machine was set to a motion sensor. Every time someone approached the bridge, soft mist rolled in, and a small speaker played ambient harp music. It was peaceful, so peaceful, in fact, that several neighbors began complimenting it. "It's like living next to a spa," one woman said. Another neighbor asked if I could help design a similar feature in their yard. But the real prize was yet to come. The look on Karen's face when she would see it in its full glory. The final touch came when we installed fish, actual koi, bright orange and white, swimming lazily through the moat. The next morning, we unveiled it in silence. The bridge was raised, the moat was gleaming, and Karen, punctual as ever, marched down the street in her usual tracksuit and visor. She froze when she saw it. For a moment, I thought she was going to short-circuit. Her eyes darted from the water to the bridge to the fog rolling in at her feet. She looked like someone just stole her Wi-Fi. "What is this?" she finally asked. I smiled, sipping my coffee like a Bond villain, and replied, "A decorative water feature. It's fully compliant. Would you like to see the blueprints?" She stood there speechless, staring at the now inaccessible driveway that used to be her personal parking space. I could almost hear her internal scream. And for the first time since I moved in, she turned around and walked away. No citations, no threats, no sarcasm, just silence. It was a small moment, but in that silence, I heard something beautiful, the sound of victory. The battle had just begun, but for now, I had the upper hand and a moat full of fish to prove it. The peace didn't last long. I should have known better. Karen's retreat that morning wasn't surrender, it was a regrouping. And like any self-appointed suburban warlord, she was already plotting her counterattack. For 2 whole days, things were eerily quiet. No HOA letters, no surprise inspections, no new rules mysteriously taped to my door. It felt like the eye of a storm. Even Rick, who was now spending more time at my place than his own, started to get paranoid. He kept checking the drawbridge wiring like we were about to be invaded, and in a way, we were. Karen's vengeance wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be procedural, precise, and delivered with a smile that could curdle milk. The first sign came as a crisp white envelope in my mailbox. No stamps, no address, just notice of community concern in gold embossed letters. I opened it cautiously. It was a cease and desist, a formal HOA directive accusing me of creating an unauthorized water hazard that disrupted the uniformity of the neighborhood. Karen had filed it through some obscure emergency clause. It demanded that I drain the moat immediately, dismantle the drawbridge, and submit to a property aesthetic review panel for further evaluation. She had created an entire committee overnight, probably handpicked from the same group of neighbors who complained if someone's lawn was mowed an hour late. Rick read the letter twice and muttered, "She's going full Karen. This is DEFCON 2. Instead of panicking, I smiled because I had a plan. While she was busy trying to weaponize bureaucracy, I was preparing for battle in the shadows. Rick and I had installed cameras around the property, not just to watch the moat, but to monitor Karen. And those garden gnome cameras? They had sound. What we caught over the last few days was gold. Karen had been coaching her lackeys on how to document fake violations. One clip showed her saying, "Just make it look like water splashed into the road. I'll say it's a slip hazard." Another featured her plotting to block my garbage pickup to trigger a sanitation fine. She was playing dirty, and now I had proof. Still, I had to attend the HOA emergency meeting, now titled The Water Hazard Menace, held in the community center. It was like walking into a courtroom hosted by PTA parents with clipboards. Karen stood at the front in her usual power outfit, flipping through a thick binder like she was a lawyer in a courtroom drama. She opened with a dramatic slideshow presentation featuring blurry photos of my moat, ominous red arrows pointing at alleged flood zones, and one particularly hilarious image labeled "Structural Danger, Potential for Alligator Nesting." She had really outdone herself. When it was my turn to speak, I stood with a calmness that only comes from knowing you've got a surprise plot twist hidden in your pocket. I thanked the committee for their time, then played the footage. The room fell silent as Karen's voice echoed from the speakers, instructing her minions to stage complaints and fabricate hazard reports. Her smile dropped faster than her SUV's value in a flood zone. One of the HOA board members, a sweet older woman named Judith, gasped audibly. Another member, a retired firefighter, leaned forward and said, "That's entrapment." The room buzzed with whispered outrage. Karen tried to backpedal, claiming the audio was fake, edited, or AI-generated. But then Rick, dressed in a borrowed suit 2 sizes too big, stepped forward and introduced himself as a technical consultant. He gave a hilariously over-the-top explanation about data integrity, timestamps, and metadata that nobody understood, but everyone accepted. Karen's protest was overruled. The meeting dissolved into chaos. People were arguing, board members were pointing fingers, and someone knocked over a tray of sugar-free cookies. After the meeting, things escalated quickly. Karen doubled down on her campaign. She stopped speaking to neighbors who didn't side with her. She posted passive-aggressive updates in the community newsletter, accusing me of inciting division and architectural rebellion. But the tide was turning. My moat had become something of a local legend. Kids loved it. Families stopped by during evening walks just to see the bridge go up and down. Someone even brought breadcrumbs for the koi fish. I was becoming less of a villain and more of a neighborhood icon. That's when Karen made her biggest mistake. She tried to park across my driveway again, this time in defiance, thinking I wouldn't dare activate the drawbridge. But I had anticipated this moment. The bridge was already retracted when she arrived. Her SUV rolled slowly forward, and with the precision of a cartoon mishap, the front wheels dipped right into the moat. It wasn't deep, just enough for her tires to get stuck. No damage, no injuries, just the loudest splash of poetic justice I'd ever heard. Rick and I were sipping lemonade on the porch when it happened. She stepped out of her car, soaked to the knees, her visor dripping, and screamed, "This is sabotage." The neighbors came out in droves, phones recording, whispers flying, and a few kids laughing way too loudly. Karen demanded someone call the police. They did. When the officer arrived, he listened to her dramatic retelling, then asked, "Ma'am, did you not see the moat?" She sputtered and pointed at me. The officer looked at the moat, the koi fish, the retractable bridge, and said, "That's actually kind of amazing." He filed a basic incident report, shrugged, and left. The moment Karen realized no one was going to come to her rescue was almost cinematic. She stood there, surrounded by neighbors who had once feared her, now smiling at her misfortune. She turned and walked away, her wet sneakers squeaking with every step. Later that evening, I received a knock on my door. It was Judith, the sweet board member. She handed me a slice of homemade pie and said, "We're going to be reviewing Karen's position soon. Just thought you'd like to know." I thanked her and watched as she walked away, whistling the theme from a certain fantasy show that involved castles and revenge. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light over the shimmering water of my not-so-little moat, I leaned back and smiled. This was no longer just about a blocked driveway. This was about standing up against tyranny, one decorative water feature at a time. The war wasn't over, but I had won the latest battle, and I had a feeling the next chapter was going to be even more ridiculous. It didn't take long for Karen to realize that humiliation wasn't something she could just brush off with a new pair of shoes and a strongly worded email. Her fall into the moat had become the neighborhood's unofficial bedtime story, retold with increasingly exaggerated details. Some said she'd sunk chest deep in water. Others claimed she tried to swim across like a deranged mermaid. Rick even printed limited edition t-shirts with a cartoon version of Karen yelling, "This is sabotage," while standing knee-deep in koi-infested water. Surprisingly, the shirts sold out at the neighborhood garage sale. The neighborhood wasn't just laughing. They were switching sides, and Karen, she was watching her kingdom crumble one sarcastic t-shirt at a time. But Karen was never the type to go down without one last dramatic performance. She vanished from the spotlight for a few days, which we all knew meant something big was coming. Sure enough, a new round of HOA letters began circulating, this time calling for a special community vote to invoke an archaic clause known as the Property Review Amendment. The clause, last used 22 years ago, allowed the HOA board to review and potentially revoke privileges from any homeowner who created an environment of aesthetic hostility or functional disruption. This translated to Karen wanting the neighborhood to vote me out of my own driveway, not my home, just the right to access it like a normal person. At first, I thought no one would take it seriously, but Karen was smart. She sweetened the deal with promises of HOA dues discounts, community BBQs, and a new dog park. She started a campaign with flyers, yard signs, and even a website, restoredravavdignity.com, featuring slow-motion footage of the moat paired with ominous piano music. It was ridiculous but effective. Some of the older neighbors, the ones who hadn't enjoyed the moat party atmosphere, started nodding in agreement. The neighborhood began to split into Team Karen versus Team Moat. Lawn signs appeared overnight. Moats are madness on one side, drawbridges for democracy on the other. The civil war of suburbia had begun. I didn't sit idle. Rick and I organized our own campaign, leaning fully into the absurdity. We hosted a float and grill event, inviting neighbors to bring pool floaties and enjoy grilled burgers next to the moat while the drawbridge lifted every hour on the hour, like a castle parade. Kids ran around wearing cardboard armor, and someone brought a speaker that played heroic trumpet music every time the bridge rose. The whole thing felt like a theme park designed by petty engineers, but more importantly, it worked. People started remembering why the moat existed in the first place, because Karen had taken things too far. Still, the vote was happening. Karen called for an official HOA arbitration meeting at the local middle school gymnasium, which had been transformed into a faux courtroom with folding chairs and clipboards. She arrived dressed like she was about to deliver a TED Talk, flanked by her loyal committee members. I arrived with Rick, a thermos of coffee, and a folder filled with HOA documents, witness statements, and one surprise piece of evidence we had been saving. The air inside buzzed with tension. Neighbors filled the seats. Some came out of curiosity, others with the kind of determination usually reserved for reality show finales. Karen opened with a speech, a long one. She talked about neighborhood values, uniformity, peace, and tradition. She used phrases like civic integrity and visual pollutants. She even cried a little, theatrically dabbing at her eyes while showing photos of the moat during different lighting conditions, claiming it shattered the emotional tranquility of the cul-de-sac. It was a performance worthy of a standing ovation, if it hadn't been so painfully fake. When it was my turn to speak, I stood quietly for a moment before I said anything. Then I thanked Karen. I thanked her for pushing me to build something creative, for forcing me to engage with my neighbors, for reminding everyone that rules should protect the community, not control it. Then I played the footage. It was a hidden camera recording from earlier that week when Karen had cornered a new family that had moved in next door. She threatened them with fines unless they voted against me, claiming she could make their welcome very uncomfortable. The audio was clear, unmistakable, and devastating. The room fell silent. Even her most loyal supporters shifted uncomfortably. The HOA board members exchanged glances. Then Rick stood up, holding a giant poster board that read, "Is this your queen?" and got a few stifled laughs from the back row. Judith, the sweet board member who had always had a soft spot for logic and baked goods, called the vote. It wasn't even close. Karen lost. Not only was the moat ruled fully compliant, but the board announced a formal vote to review Karen's presidency, citing abuse of power and manipulation. That vote would happen in 1 week. Karen stormed out before the meeting ended, her heels clicking like a countdown timer, muttering something about lawsuits and media bias. Back in the neighborhood, the atmosphere shifted completely. People who had been unsure now walked past my house smiling. Kids named the koi fish. Someone left a thank you note in my mailbox with a hand-drawn picture of the moat titled "Best Backyard Ever." The HOA began updating its charter with new clauses, including one that formally allowed creative water installations as long as they met safety guidelines. Karen's reign was unraveling, one rule at a time. But perhaps the most surreal moment came when a small local news team showed up. Apparently, someone had tipped them off about the suburban drawbridge war. They interviewed me on the lawn, capturing the drawbridge in action while Rick demonstrated its fog machine and remote features like he was on a game show. The anchor called it a refreshing story of neighborhood innovation versus outdated control. Karen declined to comment, but she was seen the next day pulling all her campaign signs out of the ground like weeds. The Civil War was over, and though the moat remained the same size, it now symbolized something bigger. It wasn't just a barrier. It was a statement that even in the world of lawn regulations and HOA handbooks, creativity and reason still had a place. I sat by the water that night, legs dangling over the edge, watching the koi swim peacefully under the starlight. Rick brought over 2 cans of soda and sat beside me. Neither of us said much. We didn't have to. The neighborhood was quiet, but this time it wasn't suspicious silence. It was peace, real peace, the kind you earn after a hard-fought, ridiculous, and oddly satisfying suburban war. The final week of Karen's reign was unlike anything I could have predicted. It was like watching a reality show unravel in real time. Only the drama wasn't scripted, and the stakes were gloriously real. Her campaign to regain control of the HOA was loud, desperate, and oddly theatrical. She went door to door, handing out glossy pamphlets titled, "Take Back Our Driveways," complete with manipulated images of my moat surrounded by yellow caution tape and what looked like a poorly photoshopped alligator. She hosted a community brunch in her backyard, trying to woo neighbors with dry bagels and forced smiles. But the damage had been done. Her threats, her manipulation, and the SUV moat dip could not be erased by stale pastries and bullet-point promises about noise regulation. Meanwhile, I focused on what I now referred to as drawbridge diplomacy. Instead of fighting back, I opened the moat, metaphorically and literally. I hosted another float and grill, invited families for koi feeding sessions, and let the kids take turns pressing the remote to raise the drawbridge. We installed safety lights around the perimeter, added more plants to make it look even more decorative, and added a small bench facing the water. It was no longer just a statement. It was a feature of the neighborhood. A couple of residents even approached me to ask for Rick's help in building their own smaller backyard versions. Karen had tried to weaponize the HOA into controlling the community, but instead, she'd accidentally sparked a wave of whimsical creativity. The day of the final HOA vote was buzzing with anticipation. This wasn't just a procedural meeting. It felt like a public reckoning, held in the same middle school gym. The place was packed beyond capacity. Folding chairs lined every corner. Neighbors who hadn't attended a single meeting in 5 years showed up just to witness history. Even the local news crew returned, having caught wind of the community drama's final chapter. Karen walked in last, dressed in all white, as if she were attending a courtroom wedding, chin lifted high and clipboard held like a sword. She greeted a few allies with tight-lipped smiles, but her usual command of the room was gone. The whispers, the glances, and the polite nods replacing applause made it clear the crowd wasn't with her anymore. The board called the meeting to order. Judith, now acting as interim president, began the proceedings with a soft but firm tone. She explained that the purpose of the vote was not to humiliate or punish, but to determine whether Karen had violated her duties as HOA president and failed to represent the best interests of the community. Karen immediately requested to speak and launched into a long-winded defense filled with phrases like unified aesthetic harmony, emotional property damage, and even, at one point, vehicular aquatic entrapment. She brought up noise complaints, the danger of children near water, and even accused Rick and me of building a moat purely to provoke chaos. Then Judith gave me the floor. I didn't use dramatic flair or overly rehearsed arguments. I simply told the story of how it started with her blocking my driveway, how every attempt to cooperate was met with escalation, and how the moat only existed because all other options had been exhausted. I pointed out that it was built within the rules, embraced by the community, and that the only real disruption was Karen's response to it. I read aloud testimonials from neighbors who had supported the project, even a note from a child who wrote, "I like the fish. They make the street happy." I could see Karen fuming in her seat, tapping her nails against her clipboard like she was auditioning for a villain role in a Disney reboot. The vote was conducted by secret ballot. Rick passed around the forms with a big, goofy grin, whispering, "Let the democracy flow like koi through calm waters." It took only 15 minutes for the votes to be counted. The result was that Karen was removed from her position by a landslide. The room erupted in polite but unmistakable applause. Karen stood there frozen, her face a mix of disbelief and outrage. She muttered something about legal action, then stormed out, slamming the gym door so hard it knocked over a stack of folding chairs. That was the last time we saw her in an HOA meeting. In the days that followed, something incredible happened. The atmosphere in the neighborhood changed. People smiled more, they waved, they stopped to chat during walks. They offered help with yard work. For the first time since I'd moved in, it felt like a community instead of a battleground. The HOA board voted to relax some of the more ridiculous rules, including lawn measurement regulations and approved mailbox colors. Rick even suggested starting a monthly creativity contest for the most unique yard feature, which was surprisingly approved. The very idea Karen had fought against, individuality and expression, was now being celebrated. Karen didn't vanish completely. She still lived in the neighborhood, but her presence faded. The SUV that once stood like a blockade across my driveway now sat silently in her garage. She no longer marched the streets with her clipboard, and her yard signs slowly disappeared. Some said she was planning to move. Others said she was plotting a comeback in the next election cycle. But for now, her power was gone, and the community was no longer afraid. I spent more time by the Moat, usually with Rick, sometimes with neighbors who stopped by just to chat. The koi fish grew fat and happy, the lilies bloomed in clusters, and the drawbridge lifted like clockwork every evening, just because we could. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and the soft glow of string lights danced on the water, Rick turned to me and said, "You realize you basically turned passive aggression into an art form, right?" I laughed. "It wasn't aggression," I said. "It was creative problem solving." He raised his can of soda and said, "To the moat that built a community." I clinked mine against his and watched as a dragonfly skimmed across the surface of the water. That night, as I sat on the porch and looked at what we'd built, not just the moat but the weird little legacy it left behind, I felt something rare. It wasn't pride, not exactly. It was more like contentment, the kind that only comes after a storm has passed, and you know you've not only survived it, but somehow grown stronger because of it. My driveway may have been blocked, but in the end, I had opened up something much bigger, a neighborhood that remembered how to laugh, how to push back against petty tyranny, and how to come together in the most unexpected ways. And all it took was water, a bridge, and the refusal to let a Karen win.